Welcome back, everyone. Well, it's the day after election. A lot of Monday morning quarterbacking and whatever. But you want to know something? I love politics, and the person sitting next to me loves politics. So I can think of no better person than to come in and talk about what happened with this election than Mike Lenz. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Jesse. Glad to be here.
Good to have you here. Let's jump right into it. Now, you know we don't editorialize here on Look TV. A couple of cliches. First, let's establish the fact that maybe democracy is the best, biggest experiment in politics. You know, if you start there, then that gives you a lot of wiggle room for opinions, for positions, for candidates, right?
Absolutely. I mean, our job, at least I see as my job as the host of Beyond the Headlines, is to try to present different candidates and different business people throughout the community in as objective a way as you can. But after the elections are over, it's always fun to be able to go back and analyze them, and that's what we're doing. So we try not to offer too much of an opinion, but it is a lot of fun to analyze.
Boy, it certainly is. You know, you and I feel both the same way about it. And we're also probably a little jaded, at least I am, given my age. I've seen a lot of elections go through, and I love to follow it. Hey, let's start with the congressional race. Elise Stefanik, Aaron Wolf.
Yeah, that was a race that we've been following for a long time because Elise announced way back last August that she was going to seek the seat that was being vacated by Bill Owens. And we had her on the show back when she was in a primary against Matt Doheny. We had Matt on the show. And then after Elise won the primary, we had Aaron Wolf on the show. So had the opportunity to talk to really all the candidates that were involved in that particular race. And she made history. At the end of the day, she made history. She's the youngest woman elected to the House of Representatives. And I think the race took on a different tone depending on who she was running against. But the opponents in both cases, both Doheny and Wolf, tried to paint her as what they called a Washington insider, that she'd been part of the Bush administration. She was involved in Washington, didn't really understand the issues of the district. Both Matt and Aaron lived in the district and felt that they would better represent the constituency there. But overall, it's a Republican, heavily Republican district, and she ended up carrying the day.
You know what? A little bit of a sidebar here, and I just want to try to get your opinion on this. I happened to be in the company of John Boehner when he was here, when he was talking about it. And very interestingly, he never talked about her qualifications. He mentioned two things that stuck in my head. And this may be very indicative of the Republican position, but it might not be. But his opinion was we need more women in the Republican Party, and Matt Doheny can't win. Now, both those things kind of struck me as rubber stamping. And then I thought to myself, you know what? We did have Matt Doheny on. He's a very qualified candidate. You know, Elise Stefanik, say what you will, but I thought that she was a little inexperienced, you know, and then we go, let's hit Aaron Wolf, okay?
Sure. I mean, you know, Elise had never run for public office before, so certainly on that basis, she was inexperienced. But we talked about this before on the show, where politics is about framing.
Right.
And at that level, when you're talking about the speaker, looking at candidates for congressional seats, they're talking about framing and what they want their candidates to represent. I believe that they felt that Elise represented the face of the younger generation, or what they wanted the younger generation's face to be in the Republican Party. I don't think that's a bad choice in that respect. You saw it on the commercials all over the airwaves about that women were a big issue in this campaign. The Women's Equality Act at the state level was hotly debated and talked about, and equal pay for equal women. So women were a focus. And from that perspective, it was a smart choice in hindsight to pick a woman to seek that open seat. Now, the experience issue is always a tough one because at some point somebody has to run for the first time, right? So she didn't have necessarily the experience that maybe a Matt Doheny had, but she certainly had as much experience as her Democratic candidate did, Aaron Wolf, who had, again, no prior experience running for office. So at that level, I think they were on fairly even ground.
You know what? We had Aaron Wolf on Beyond the Headlines, as well as Elise Stefanik and Matt Doheny, as Mike said. He was an interesting character, right? Now, we could peel the curtain back just a little bit on this one, right?
Well, it was an interesting interview. You know, he was he was focused on himself, which I guess as a candidate would be when they're being interviewed. I thought it was a pretty good interview. We had some issues before we went on the air, but I think as overall it was a good interview. I think he made his case. He was battling an overwhelming Republican majority in terms of the registered voters in the district. A huge district. The 21st district is larger than some states in the United States of America. So big geographic district that he had to go through, and he didn't have a lot of name recognition going into it. At least had the advantage of having gone through a difficult primary and had gotten out there early, and I think a lot more people knew who she was. That combined with the fact that she had the enrollment advantage and some of the dissatisfaction at the national level with the Obama administration, as we saw in a lot of races across the country, may have trickled down and had an effect on that race as well.
I think, of all the races, and obviously there were some other local races that I'd love to get your opinion on, but when you're running for Congress, there is a real trickle down from a national level. And I think the people, I know that I feel this way, you're very, very worried about gridlock, which they refer to today as deadlock. I mean, I've never seen this kind of divisiveness in politics in my adulthood. And, it harkens back to the days when you think of, Reagan as president had a complete Democrat Congress. He and Tip O'Neill could belly up to a cup of coffee at any given moment and work things out. Bill Clinton had Newt Gingrich. Clinton Democrat, Gingrich Republican. Congress was run by, by Republicans. They got along. They figured it out.
I'll tell you, and I heard this on the national news last night, that some of the Democrats in the Senate, they were saying, might not be shedding any tears about this result. Because, again, this is the criticism coming from the Republican side, was that Harry Reid was holding up a lot of legislation. They feel that now at least they're going to be able to legislate, do their job, debate, and put laws out there for the president, before the president, and he'll either approve them or he'll veto them. But the process will begin, hopefully, to move forward again, because that's really what I think the American public wants. They want their elected officials to do what they're elected to do, which is go to Washington and legislate. And I think that was that gridlock and deadlock that you talked to. Depending on which side of the aisle you're on, you're going to blame the other side.
Right.
The sides now have changed. Republicans have control of the Senate. Republicans have control of the House of Representatives. So it will now be the Republicans' opportunity to lead, and only time will tell whether that will change the
Well,
situation
you know what?
in Washington.
You're right, and I've always been a proponent of this. I've always been a proponent of the check and balance in this great experiment called democracy. If the president, if the executive branch is one party, I think Congress should be another party, because then it can't hide behind anything. You have legislation that's being presented to the American people. You've got leadership in Congress. You've got leadership at the executive branch. Let's watch these people go at it.
And that's what our forefathers envisioned,
That's
that's what we like to see happen. And you talk about the trickle-down effect, but there was a congressional race, Paul Tonko's race, where I think at that level, when you have candidates that have been around for a long time and are well-liked and well-respected, like Paul Tonko, even though it's a congressional race, which is a national seat, it's still a local race. It's a local congressional seat. And although Democratic incumbents across the country had a tough night last night, candidates like Paul Tonko had a great night. He was successful in his reelection bid. You look at the state Senate race, Senator Hugh Farley, been in office for 38 years. His opponent was a candidate. She was on the show. We interviewed her. She got about the same amount of votes as she got when she ran against him 2 years ago. He's been around a long time, and he was an incumbent, but so well known and apparently well liked by the votes that he got. It's hard to unseat those incumbents at that local level.
Yes, that's right. I'm glad you picked those. I had written them both down myself. Again, when all politics is local. So, you get the people who the voters know. They know them. They see them on the street. They see them at their auditoriums, and that relationship that they begin to build with these candidates holds either party, right? And
Absolutely.
there are two great examples on both sides, Hugh Farley.
Absolutely.
And Paul Tonko.
And then you look at seats like Stefanik's seat, which was an open seat.
Right.
That's a whole different ballgame.
A whole different ball game. I'm sure you're aware that Kerry Warner won over Stallman. A lot of people say the last week turned that election.
Yeah, I had spoken to people about that election, and some Republicans had told me that it was, a slam dunk. That again, the the Republican enrollment in the district was significant, that Stallmer was going to win. I didn't necessarily think that strongly that that was the case. I knew that the enrollment was there, but I think in the Warner-Stallmer race, it was unique in that Kerry has run, this was the third time that she'd run.
That's right.
She did very well against Tony Jordan the last time she ran against him. She got 40% of the vote. So people knew her. I remember when I was mayor, Kerry was the executive director of the Preservation Foundation in Saratoga Springs. So she was well known in Saratoga Springs. She was well liked in Saratoga Springs. And I think name recognition combined with the fact that she had run before and done well, people had pulled the lever for her already, and Steve was a relative unknown, and I think that ultimately made the difference. Now, as it got close to election, there was some issues with him making accusations that she had raised taxes in Round Lake. I think she really benefited from the fact that the Post-Star, when they endorsed her, essentially said that Stallmer had lied. Now, it's one thing, politicians will always tell people that their opponent lied. It's one thing when a third party, especially a newspaper that's fairly well respected in the area, says it. And she ran an effective ad that highlighting the Post-Star endorsement and saying that the Post-Star had indicated that he had lied about her record. And again, that only helped her, and I think it only hurt him in the long run. And she won by 1,000 votes. So
yeah, I know. It an interesting thing from a media perspective on that campaign, she ran spots that were not negative spots. It was all about her and what she's done. And then this last week it turned negative. I think they got angry. I think they got angry at Stallmer and thought, you know, you're going to come after us. We're going to go after you, and they did that.
And again,
I'd argue with you
seat.
about the credibility of the Post-Star, but we'll leave that one on the table.
Sure, but again, an open seat. I mean, those things, you know, there was no incumbency to deal with. You had two candidates who were running. Neither one was an incumbent. So the dynamics of the race always changes when you have that.
A couple of expected, Schneiderman, DiNapoli, very, very hard to unseat. You know, look at Cuomo again. Now, interesting there, of course, we were living in decidedly Republican counties up here in the North Country. Astorino carried up here. Boy, you come up against New York City, look out.
Well, you know, they always make that argument, right, that we should split the city or do some type of an electoral college in New York State, because depending on which side of the aisle you're on, either fortunately or unfortunately, down in Manhattan and New York City, the Democratic Party controls really New York State. So you have statewide candidates, Governor Cuomo, Eric Schneiderman, and Tom DiNapoli, who were successful in getting reelected. I don't think anybody was surprised by that. What I found somewhat surprising was the margin with which they won. I know Astorino got over 40% of the vote. John Cahill had been, at some polls, was down almost 30 points. He was lost by 13. So the margins were not as significant as we've seen in the past.
Right.
And again, I think that is the trickle down from the national level. And although the Democrats have a stronghold at the state level, I think we're seeing those margins shrink a little bit because of what was happening at the national level.
Right. Well, Michael, we got to wrap it up. Our grand experiment, I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the results from last night to see what the next 2 years especially will bring when we're going to have another presidential election. And boy, is that going to be a battle.
And I'm sure, you know, today it begins, because as soon as these midterms are over, now we're going to start talking
all
about
the pundits jump in and off they go again.
It'll be a lot of fun.
One last thing I want to bring up, happy anniversary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Those of you who follow Beyond the Headlines, and I know there's a lot of you, the traffic we get and the questions we get are really good. It's amazing to me sometimes. This weekend I got hit with it over the weekend. I like that Mike Lenz.
Well, you know, you could fool people some of the time, I guess. But but I appreciate the comments. You know, I remember last year on Election Day, I was contemplating giving you a call saying, hey, you want to do some analysis? And at that point, I wasn't doing anything with Look TV. And a couple days later, you came in and we talked about an interesting show you had about Beyond the Headlines, and here we are a year later. So,
well, that's great.
Had a lot of fun.
You're off to Florida with the family. Have a safe trip.
Thank you.
I'll see you on the other side, and let's start it all over again.
Excellent.
Thank you, Michael.
You bet.
To see this interview again, head to our website, looktvonline.com.